That's why I say AI is so wonderful. I've been using it not only for work, but also in creative pursuits. My hobby's songwriting and playing little garage basement bands. I've
Oh,
been doing
cool.
that for
We'll talk
years.
about
Yeah,
that.
I met someone who had a certain personality, which was very chill and vibey and creative and awesome. But then I received an email from him. It was nothing like him. But I said, "You didn't happen to use AI?" He's like, "How did you know?"
Do you think the legal system's being upturned by AI? Do you think it's affecting it negatively? Is AI hype or help? G'day and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Pete Cooper, and our topic is AI hype or help. Today's guest is Skylar Showell. Skylar is a consultant with a legal background. He helps startups and other small businesses grow as a consultant, but also with his specialty in legal. He's got some really good insights into AI. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. Well, welcome, Skylar. Welcome to the show. I believe you are in the field of the legal field, but also very knees deep into AI. So I'm really looking forward to getting into some of the changes that are happening with AI. But before we do that, what do you do, Skylar?
Hi, Pete. Yeah, it's great to be on. Thank you for having me. So the quickish answer is I'm DC based. I'm an attorney. I have a relatively diverse background that includes business, finance, investment fund executive in undergrad, among other things. I studied design and product and industrial. So I have a fairly holistic, approach to being a lawyer, I suppose, but still all the traditional goodness. I primarily help small clients who are either startups or small organizations to, start, grow, change, and as I like to say, stay out of trouble if they listen to me, and
Hmm.
mostly they do. So that's kind of the quick answer. I'm happy to expound upon that, but my clients are often small businesses or startups involved with tech, and one of my favorites is the intersection of technology, creative endeavors or professions, and/or great causes. And on the Venn diagram, some of my clients are one of those. A few of my clients are none of those, but some of them are two of those things. And occasionally, I have the beautiful unicorn trifecta of all three. So.
Right. So, I mean, having been a founder myself of a startup, it's definitely fraught with ways to make mistakes, right? Very, very easy. Um, do you have any do you work on the business side as well? Or is it mainly just focused on the legal side, trying to keep them out of trouble legally across the board? How do you fit there?
Great question. So, primarily, I'm brought on or hired as legal counsel. But what's happened over the years is on the side, I have been a founder, a principal myself. And then occasionally, what happens is if we mesh and gel and things are going well and the startup survives any amount of time, occasionally I'm pulled in as a principal or co-owner, co-founder who, obviously takes a charge on the legal issues. And in that respect, I can become in-house. So it just depends. Sometimes what happens is because my background is a little more diverse than some attorneys, and I very much love the creative and the business, the strategy, et cetera. Like I said, sometimes I get pulled into being, in-house.
Hmm. Hmm. So, I've got many, many stories about things that I have done and failed, and I try to think of some good examples, but I think one of the big ones is not going after the problem. I've been accused of that, like building some technology and trying to find a market for it or a fit for
Mm,
it. This is a great
absolutely.
idea. We can do this, but do I really have a customer problem? Do you see that a lot?
Absolutely. There are some really talented people. You see it obviously in Silicon Valley the most, but it can happen anywhere where someone builds something really cool
Mm,
and
mm,
they basically have a solution and then they go search for a problem. And
mhm,
it just
mhm,
so often isn't a problem that people really wrestle with. Now, to
mm,
be fair, that could pivot into something that is. And as I always tell people, don't expect your first time up to bat, to use that sports analogy, to hit a home run, but it can get you to meet people, it can get you to network, you can pivot it. In fact, the last startup I was brought into, not just to advise, I, unlike my earlier days, had enough sense to know, I don't have a particular reason to think this startup is necessarily going to succeed in a traditional, fancy, showy way, but I like these people The
Mm.
networking's there. I enjoy the camaraderie and whatnot. So for me, it wasn't so much thinking and saying, will this blow up or be acquired? Because, when you start talking IPO, that almost marks you as a bit of a newbie or a green. But, reasonably speaking, a successful business lifestyle, it's not a
Mm.
dirty word, lifestyle business, or an
Oh,
acquisition
okay.
that's reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
nothing crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I said, that may not happen at all, but I like these people. I'm interested and I have something to learn and something to give. And that was enough. And I think the problem is it's so hard to manage expectations. When I was much younger and greener, it was like, this is the most exciting thing in the world. And then you're crushed if it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If you're too cool and too aloof, you just don't care. And you can't not care and get involved in something
Mm.
speculative.
Mm.
Trick is through time and wisdom and experience, I'm starting as I grow up to learn about how to live in that beautiful middle area where you care, but you're not crushed. And you think of it all as a portfolio model, right?
Mm. Mm.
Some are just going to whiff. And then if one brings you something of value, awesome.
Yeah, I love that model, Skylar. I think lived this life for 12 years. I've always got multiple things on the go, and it's a question of sort of where I need to press and where I need to manage, whether it's cash in the door or working on a big opportunity that I see. And that idea of a portfolio definitely resonates with me, and it helps you, I think it helps me at least, care about my portfolio and each program, but not be crushed when one of them's had a setback. I can say, okay, well, maybe I just emotionally need to just take a step back and go over here a little bit and spend some more time over here. Unlike if you're in a job where you get fired from your job, it just comes to an end. You lose all your relationships, not only financial, but your background, everything just stops and you hit a cliff and you fall off, So nice if you get picked up again, right, and straight back in, but that doesn't always happen to everyone.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things I can do through time and experience and honestly learning a million, I say to people, they say, well, you've been in startups, is your power, what you bring to the table that you've hit it huge, you're the next Mark Cuban or whoever. I said, absolutely not. But I can show you 101 plus ways to not do it because between me and my co-founders, especially in my younger days, we've done it wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and that can teach you a lot.
Well, Skylar, after this, maybe we should talk about some of the stuff that I've been working on. Um,
Sounds
AI
great.
vision systems, AI stuff around in the healthcare. And then I've also spent the last 2 years in construction. Seems to be lots of opportunity over there. Seems to be that construction's a little late to the not the AI. I mean, I think it's starting to happen in AI, but just technology in general it's been slow to uptake. General resistance to technology. I think people go into construction to try and avoid technology. So when it starts to come back in, there's like, oh, I didn't come here for this. I wanted to do the hands-on thing. So we
Yeah,
can
no,
talk
I've
about that
noticed
off.
that with my dealings with my real estate clients and such. Yeah, that it's not that it's not there, but it does seem to be not as adapted as quickly as the technology and creative professions.
Yeah, yeah. All right, cool. So, what's happening? What's happening right now with you? And I guess your one of the key focuses is the legal side of things. What's going on right now in the industry when it comes to your legal lens?
Oh goodness, that is an amazing question. Huge. We'll just start somewhere and try
Yeah,
to
start
pull a thread
somewhere.
on that sweater. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that the law always lags technology. And
Hmm.
that's not entirely bad. It's certainly foreseeable. It's really always been the case, pretty much.
Hmm.
And it's natural. Law
Hmm.
is often a little more reactive than forward looking, at least in our legal system. In civil law countries, maybe slightly less so. Um, yeah, there's so little regulation. There's obviously a lot of talk about it, but there's precious little. There's relatively little case law, even, especially that's practical.
Hmm.
And my focus is on small clients and being in the trenches. Obviously, if you want a really keen day-to-day perspective on the Fortune 100 or 500, I'm not, that's not so much me, although I keep track of the news. But I see a lot of hardworking entrepreneurs, little businesses and startups, struggling with the promises, the hype, and the intelligence washing, as I call it. We've heard of whitewashing, greenwashing. I think there's a lot of intelligence washing. And by that, I just mean everyone's product is AI. And, we know a lot of that is layers built on top of things like ChatGPT 4 plus and, 5 plus now, and Gemini. In other words, and even some of the clients I currently have, they're doing things to repackage and refront end that cheaper, more or less free, pretty reliable data that AI is parsing and things. So a lot of that's going on. Advisors like myself in legal, but not just, also are being pushed up the value curve, certainly in perception, but to some extent in reality. And by that, I mean, increasingly, a really savvy person with AI I stress might be able to come up with a draft or legal advice for something incredibly simple with AI alone. And I say might. But the problem I see is it is instilling a huge amount of confidence that may not be entirely warranted in a person that doesn't do this. And the smarter the person is, sometimes the worse it is. I think it's always a good thing to assume that everybody's job's hard. I don't assume to know more about the arcane aspects of tax than my accountant. I certainly don't question my doctor or dentist too much. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not engaged, but so I think you have to be careful that. I think it can be good for issue spotting. It can be good for education. It can be good to tee up more concise conversations if your advisor is hourly. But it can give you a false sense of security. And I'll give you two examples that I think are just perfect. One is in less of a business context. So in the context of estate planning, and this has already been true of some of the document providers and sort of the, whoever picks up the phone, some of the legal services, there's not really necessarily deep expertise in a relationship. So in the estate planning context, when you're providing for your children, you may think automatically of who can be good for them day to day, right? Get them off to school and such. But another big aspect is who can handle their money. Often some money's left in trust. Now, someone that does this for a living can tell you that it's often not the same person, right? It doesn't need to be. But many of these forms and things I see, or what AI can cough up, is a single blank in a form for one person. Now, the problem is if you don't do that for a living, or you haven't been through that, you don't even know to ask the question. You don't even know what you're missing, right? A more germane example I see for business is, a proper buyout or buy-sell agreement for two or more co-owners can easily be, the streamlined version I use is about 18 pages, and that's keeping it as plain English as possible because there's a lot to cover. And if you do it well, there's not a lot to fight about. But some of the forms and what I've seen AI put out too doesn't even have clear restrictions and certainly no detail about transferring ownership, right? That is a massively important, that takes some ink to do right. And if not, you might be in business with your especially for a young founder, your co-founder's roommate or ex-boyfriend or girlfriend or something. It's so fundamental, but the thing is you wouldn't know to ask if you don't do this for a living,
Right.
or if you haven't at least been around the block a time or two. So that's why I say AI is so wonderful. I've been using it not only for work, but also in creative pursuits. My hobby's songwriting and playing little garage basement bands. Been
cool.
doing that for
We'll
years.
talk about
that. Yeah, I love it. Well, you can see the instruments on my back wall. I'm a fan. But so it can instill a false sense of confidence. It helps me a lot in my job. It's almost like, because I pretty lean on staffing, I'm not a huge shop, it's almost like a super smart, super fast, eager junior person. But the reason I can use it well, and I assume it's true for other advisors and professionals, is because I already has 20 years of experience to filter the output through. I know what I'm looking for. And oftentimes I'm going in, I have my trusted drafts that I update, my templates that I've had for years. It's about some very arcane thing I want to dive into, a starting point for research, just like Wikipedia even can be a starting point for research. But I think if you let it be your ending point, you may be asking for trouble, at least as it is now.
Good. Yeah, I think, I'm going to make a simple example where, I use a spell checker now. back in the day, when I was still at college, I had to write up my thesis, my undergraduate thesis, and the idea of doing it with pen and paper, which seemed so painful to me that I went and bought a computer with a word processor on it, and that was the best thing I ever bought because then I could edit what I was writing. I still never became any good at writing, and I would make a lot of errors. And then kind of, tools came in to help me with the spelling. And that was
Mhm.
a big breakthrough. And that's only been in the last few years. Now, when I type an email, the spelling grammar's all fixed up for me, but it sometimes changes the meaning, right? If I let it go, and it'll change, the cat sat on the mat to the dog sat on the mat. If I don't read it and accept it, then it's going to go out wrong. And then that becomes even worse with the, ChatGPT is a good example, or any of those things where if you don't review what it says critically, it can be completely wrong. And I've had now my team, I encourage them to use the tools, but I say, do not give it to me unless you understand every single word. And the same thing with coding. Unless you've coded, you understand every single line, you don't know it. And so initially when they come on, they realize I'm reading. I say, what does this mean? What does that mean? They don't know. So now they have to know. Certainly to me, it helps me write faster, research faster, but it can't. And the temptation, I think, is what you said. Smart people tend to sort of be even worse at it. You think, well, I've created it. It must be great, even if I'm using the tools without sort of just hang on, maybe this is all wrong. What is this thing? Can I fact check that? It can lead you down a very path of reinforcing as a founder, you've got that natural positivity to see the things that encourage you to keep you optimistic about the future and completely can miss something really important.
Oh, absolutely. And what I analogize to it, I remember way back to undergrad when I took a intro to stats course. The professor said, look, the first time you do these basic statistic equations and work this out, I'm going to have you do it by hand. And he said, you're going
Mm,
to hate me for it. And after
mhm,
that, I'm going to tell you to use Excel for the rest of your life. And I'm going to show you how to do that. But if you don't have some sense of what it was like to do by hand once, you're
mm,
not going to understand as well. And same when I was in design school.
mhm,
We do this classic Bauhausian intro foundational year thing where you're doing color chips and a grayscale. And the temptation is to try to eyeball it and pick just 10 chips in the right steps.
mhm,
And the professor says you're going to be tempted because it will save you hours, but
mm,
you will not have a great result. It's the difference between a B and a C or an A and a B. And, like Hans and Franz on SNL used to say, hear me now and
mhm,
believe me later. And
mhm,
it's true. And just like in design school, when they say, we're going to show you how to do these things on Illustrator or Photoshop, but you need to know how to do some basic drawing to communicate your ideas. And in a lot of instances, for internal purposes, you can think quicker with a pen or pencil than you can with dragging, the cursor around and doing
mm,
all these things. I
mm,
mean, AI is a little different, but
mm,
so you're only better. AI can be at its fullest when you have some sense of how to do the underlying thing.
mm.
So what it may be most long-term great at is helping to teach you educationally to be able to use it better and to have the underlying skill.
So underlying skills, another one. I think here in the US, they're no longer teaching people to write cursively. I mean, I was taught, probably you were too, running, writing, very fast, and still readable. I still make notes every day, all day, every day. And when I turn up to meetings, I've always got it there. And if something comes to mind that I need, I can just write it down really quickly. I look at the younger generation, and I guess I don't want to say that necessarily, but a lot of people anyway don't turn up with a pen and paper, and they come to a meeting. How are they going to remember everything that was said, right? How are they going to remember that, the certain number that was maybe mentioned? A pen and a paper to me is such a fast way of keeping me engaged and documenting what's needed so I can go back to it that I can't dismiss it, even though I'm using all the AI tools. And I think this is maybe it's just a personal thing, but I think it's also very indicative of what you're saying is that learning those base level skills still carries over very well into the use of AI. And perhaps young people, when they come through, they use AI so much, they don't have that underlying foundation. And therefore, it's even more difficult for them to see when things are wrong.
Yeah, well, you're talking to an enthusiast and collector of contemporary and antique fountain pens, and I use them every day. I've got some right here in front of me, and that perfect paper pen nib and ink combination, and there's
Hmm.
thousands of inks, and so I mean, so I'm a little biased, but yeah, and I believe that cognitive research that's widely accepted it suggests that the problem is if you're a good typer, you can, and I know this is true, and I've tried to do this even with a pen, and it really doesn't work. You can accidentally sort of create a transcript,
Hmm.
which is not doesn't imprint on your mind generally as well as note taking that's more selective when you have to think about what you're writing because your hand goes a bit slower, most people, than your typing fingers can.
Hmm.
And it's actually more helpful to do actual notes than it is to try to create a transcript.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I remember really early in my career, being eager and bushy-tailed. I'd go in with the managing partner, my mentor, and we'd take a client meeting, and I would write so furiously. And in court, when I was second chair, I would do that, and it was like I would have this verbatim almost, and you can't quite even do like a stenographer. But I'm like, I didn't remember as much as when I occasionally took a note and I listened.
Hmm. Mm.
It's like
Exactly.
watching a concert through your phone screen because you're trying to tape the entire thing. Um, there's a place
Yes.
for both. And, it's
Yes.
easy to say, oh, you guys, you're just old men, shaking your fist at the clouds. Well, no, there's a place for both. I love and
Mm.
embrace technology. I
Hmm.
have a part analog, part digital. When it comes to search and storage, nothing beats digital. Calendar,
Hmm.
nothing. Although my better half, she's tech savvy and loves a paper Japanese planner and calendar, great.
Mm. Mm.
But when you combine the best of both, I tend to take notes in longhand and ink on paper, and then I
Yep.
translate that. And usually that review and translation, whittling them down and putting them somewhere digital, um, is really effective for me. I think for most people, certainly for
Yep.
me.
Yep. Yep. So, I mean, I don't know a lot about the physiology of the mind, but what kind of makes sense to me when I do that is this process. I used to do it when I was studying. You'd go to all the whole course for the whole semester, and you had to kind of compress everything into summarizable formats that you could then remember the key things that you would take into the exam because it was often closed book, and there would be certain acronyms that you would soccer tour was one of them for the trigonometry one, which I remembered. And so there was this kind of constant summarization that came up that helped you gain access to the whole year's learning in a very summarized format with just, and I would find myself summarizing and then re-summarizing and re-summarizing. So when I got to the exam, it was all like, right there. I mean, that soccer tour thing, that was taught to me at school. I still remember it. If I had tried to record everything and have it transcribed through AI and then have it presented to me, it would be completely useless. I mean, I couldn't do anything with it.
No, absolutely. I don't know if you had this. I remember in high school chemistry, we would sometimes be allowed to have like one cheat sheet, one little index card, and it was
Mhm.
about how many things you could fit on that index card. And the funny thing is, in hindsight,
Yes,
as
I
silly as
remember
that was,
that.
you learn a little bit of something about what can you cram on there. What formulas are most important because you
Mm.
can't put them all.
Yes, yes.
So it's remarkable how even that can teach you something.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. So we talked a lot about sort of modern technology coming on, and of course a lot of this is AI. So in terms of the legal world, what's happening, and how is AI shaping what's happening in the legal world?
Ooh, that's a big one. Let's
Hmm.
start with some things that are more top of mind. I would say you have some folks that are increasingly finding the boundaries of leaning on it for legal citation and legal briefs, and that has its own problems. I'm a little more focused myself on the IP issues, in particular trademark and copyright. Those have an inherent interest to me as well as my daily work. Um, there's just so much going on, and there's privacy issues, data issues. An issue that I've been thinking about a lot the past couple of weeks in particular is you see increasingly these new products. There's a new one at least every day, maybe every hour, that is uh, you know, basically let this app have access to all your inboxes and it will truly be an assistant for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is very alluring. The problem is we lawyers have to be extra careful. You know, some industries more careful than others. Um, I am not going to just let any old third party app that started a week ago have access to my client information.
Mm.
And so there's this sort of cottage industry that's fenced off of a couple that are more expensive with fewer choices that are sort of either bar association stamp of approval on or, and that lags.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what people have to be careful is there's a couple things there, right? First, is that startup going to be in business in a month or two after you're onboarded and get up to speed on it?
Mm.
Maybe,
Mm.
maybe not. And two, even if they're well intentioned, what reason do you have to think that these strangers are going to do the right thing by your data or aren't? And they don't even have to be nefarious. They can
Mm-hmm.
simply just not be particularly with it on that. I mean, if yeah. So those are some things that have been
So
on my
with
mind
that
lately.
inbox thing, I guess what the term is data leaks, right? Between one company and another, because you might have several email as addresses for different accounts that you hold, and you have to hold them each private. If you allow AI to see all of them, one can get across to the other, or it can just get completely leaked out.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, it's sort of a digital version of the concern you might have if you're new to having remote assistant or virtual assistant or in office.
Mm,
You have to know and trust that person. And look, that's classic since the dawn of time. What human can you trust with your trade secrets and things?
right.
But I think it's tricky because the innovation, the features, and the things that are exciting are on the edge of these brand new startups,
Mm,
and these brand new startups are also who I can't really necessarily trust
mm,
with my sensitive client data.
mm. Yeah.
Um, so that is a needle to thread.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, then I think one of the other things which maybe you alluded to but didn't mention specifically is that to me, that in the legal world, there's a lot of contractual documentation type things, which to me were always very hard to read,
Hmm.
hard to understand sometimes. What makes sense to me is I take that legal document and I put it into an LLM and say, make this simple for me. Give me the give me the top 10 things that I need to be aware of or whatever in this contract, and then have a bit of a dialogue back and so I can understand it. Um, that to me was a really good shortcut. How do you feel about that?
Oh, it can be. I think summarizing a contract can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not as an endpoint, but as just a starting point. Like, what does
Mm,
this even say, or what are just the
mm,
business terms? The irony and the problem is that some legal terms of art, although they may seem impenetrable and arcane, the term they may be in
mm,
Latin occasionally.
mm,
Believe it or not, um, this may not be the best example, but in copyright, when you're hiring an independent contractor to do something, let's say in graphics or logo or something, and you use the term work for hire, that has a
mm,
very specific legal meaning in the US and presumably elsewhere. Um, and again, not the best example. There's more impenetrable phrases, but that has a specific term of art meaning that if you don't use the term of art, you can use even plainer English, let's say, and this comes up even more in real estate or estate planning. They have more Latin, at least in the US. But you might take a paragraph to say what those three words mean to other
mm,
lawyers and a judge, right?
mm.
And the problem is if you reinvent the wheel with drafting, you could put it in plainer English, take a lot more space to say it, and then a judge has to lift their glasses and say, "What? Oh, you're saying work for hire," but I had to go back to my chambers and read this paragraph. And
Oh, I
so,
see.
believe
Right.
it or not,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes an
Mm,
arcane phrase in law can actually be a shortcut for people that are in the profession. Is a way
right.
to think about it. So that's an
Mm,
irony
mm,
that I'm all for demystifying everything. The way I look
mm,
at it is if AI or a form provider puts me out of a job, then I'm not
mm.
particularly good or I'm in the wrong field or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting. I think that happens across every expertise, every field. There are shortcut terms
Mhm.
that as you say, have a lot of meaning. I mean, that one I talked about with the geometry thing, the SOHCAHTOA thing, that was a very short little acronym that I could use to remember how trigonometry works. But in my field, I guess in tech and in AI, there's lots and lots and lots of terms which have, a lot of embedded meaning. And when you talk to someone outside of that field, it's often quite difficult to convey the meaning, right? Because you used to, I mean, we often shorten things to, a couple of letters, so we don't have to keep saying the term, um,
Right.
and then yeah. So I think that's a very common problem, and it kind of you can't really dumb it down. I think that's the thing. You can't really dumb it down without making it exhaustive and then slowing everything down. And then anyone who's an expert knows the language is waiting for everyone else to catch up. Um, yeah, that's very interesting. I hadn't sort of thought of it like that. Yeah. Well, I guess the legal world is full of things which have that deep meaning, and of course, it's even when you study law, and I did only a little bit as part of my MBA, all the case law and the thing that's implied from the cases. You have to kind of read the case to understand how that law came about. So the whole history has context. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I suppose the flip side to that is it's all accessible, isn't it now? It's
Hmm.
I mean, people like to use the chatbots. I know I do because it takes it in a direction that I want it to go.
Hmm.
When I was studying, it was always however the lecturer wanted to present it in the way that they wanted to present it, which often meant that it was the worst way for me to receive it. Whereas
Oh,
if
yeah.
I've got an interest, I know some certain topic and they're talking about, okay, no, don't tell me any more about that. I know that, but now answer this piece. I'm going down a very quick learning path because I'm just focusing on those things that I need help with.
Absolutely. And I'm all for anything that sort of democratizes or levels the playing field for people that have fewer resources or less privilege. I mean, so
Mm,
in that
mm,
ways, the web, sort of crack the door and maybe AI is further pushing it open. So I'm all for that. But occasionally I'll tell you a perfect example. It wasn't that long ago. I met someone who had a certain personality, which was very chill and vibey and creative and awesome. But then I receive an email from him, like the kind of person you never picture in a suit and tie. And, God love him for it. Unless I happen to be in court, I'm generally not anymore either. Um, but then I receive an email that said, "Dear sir, we're heretofore. I was pleased to make your acquaintance." Like AI wrote that. And maybe because I'm a lawyer, I mean, despite me being
yeah.
casual in demeanor, it was nothing like him. It wasn't him. He didn't happen to know it. And I just said, "Hey, you didn't," this was, almost 2 years ago when using AI
Yep.
was a bit newer. But I said, "You didn't happen to use AI." He's like, "How did you know?" And I,
Yeah.
well, because it wasn't you. I mean,
You're
it wasn't
glaringly
even close
obvious.
to you. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to be particularly careful about, the button that's like, make it more formal, make it less formal. I'm not saying it doesn't have a place. And then you
Mm,
hear about especially teenagers turning to AI as a companion about serious issues. They can't talk to parents or adults, or about romantic advice or things. And you're like, whew, that just sounds really potentially dangerous. So I think
yes.
we really
Yes.
want to think about, and at the same time, those kids need advice that
Mm,
maybe they're not getting from adults or all their
mm.
counselors, whatever. So it's a very sticky wicket, as they say. I
Yes.
don't know the
Yeah.
answer. I'm lucky on a good day to know the questions,
Mm,
but they need something. But it's like a tool. Gosh, the oldest analogy I go back to is a sharp kitchen knife.
mm-hmm.
It can be the most wonderful tool. You can prepare a meal on a holiday for loved ones. You could feed underprivileged folks on the street, or you could use it to go slash someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is simply a tool that, without knowing how to use it and without caution, can be as dangerous as it is beneficial.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. And in my world, I double down on using LLMs a lot more this year. I said I'm going to commit to more time, more time. Um, and it's become almost like a business partner to me, and a business
Mm-hmm.
partner in the good and the bad sense, right? In the good sense, it's tireless. I can keep on asking it, and I don't have to be polite. I don't have to arrange meetings. Um, and it's very, very productive in terms of giving me, what I need quickly. Um, but also, it kind of is a really good bullshitter as well. And I think sometimes you meet someone who, well, we all have a tendency to, I guess, show our good side, right? To show our good side, to show that we know, even if we don't completely know the answer. And I say there's a little bit of human in this thing as well, like where you get your business partner to comment what they believe to be true, and they kind of make it up on the spot. And I think this is true, and I heard this over there, but actually fundamentally it could be completely wrong. And I guess it's kind of like the same human condition, but just a little bit more amplified.
Absolutely. In fact, I think it's in part the art of the prompt. In fact, something I
Mm,
was kind of doing, but didn't know it was called this more recently. I see a lot of articles, mostly in the tech world, but not just about the three-step or three-phase prompt method, which
hmm
is something I hadn't called it that and wasn't that formal about it, but always asking for pro and con, but more importantly,
mm,
giving the AI a persona. In
right.
other words, you can say, don't be a sycophant, uh, be devil's advocate, push me,
Right.
things like that,
hmm
because you're right, it will have a default to be sort of flattering and things. And when it
Yes.
makes a mistake, which it occasionally does, I'll point it out and then it'll say, oh, good catch. And but yeah, it's so flattering. And
Mm,
you'll love
mm,
this. Maybe
mm,
2 years ago, year and a half ago, when I started really using it, I would put in prompts that were in or respond to it in like full gentle sentences, please, thank you, and and months ago I stopped doing that. Just like it's just not necessary, right? It's more
hmm
characters. It's
hmm
like you forget, this isn't truly a person.
hmm
Um, so I think that's funny.
That's interesting. I'm still on that kind of borderline where I sometimes am polite.
Oh, I mean,
I
I'm
try never
never
to be rude, and I think,
right,
well,
right.
should I? Sometimes depending on my mood, I think I can be short or I can be a little bit
Mhm.
more polite. I don't want to completely lose my sense of being polite to people, and I worry that maybe it'll make me too blunt and not sounding like I'm caring about the person who I'm talking to.
It's funny you say that. Yeah, I can be terse or short, especially if I'm tired, never unhinged, but just not, would
Mm.
you please? That was so lovely. And, feedback, I mean, it's like, come on. For people, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the weirdest exchanges I had with AI was I was asking it to create some slides, and it was something it simply could not truly output, those graphics. In fact, what it did
Mm,
is it had some other layer it had to send the output to the file,
mm,
but what would happen is it took so long to do it, the connection would time out.
mm,
And it would
mm,
say, I'll have this for you in 5 or 10 minutes. And like a half hour would go by, I'd come back, I'd make a cup of coffee, and I'm like, hmm. And if I started to say, hey, look, I'm not trying to be on your case. I wrote something like this. I was tired. And I said, you say 5 minutes, but a half hour later isn't back. Why are you telling me one thing and doing another? I just want to understand. Do you
mm.
understand what I'm saying? And I really was reasoning or rationing. And that was one of the most interesting exchanges I had. And it would say, oh, sorry, you're right. My bad, or I got you, or. And then it finally explained to me the scenario. It said, well, in all candor, the connection is timing out between that other module and the software in the background. And I'm like, okay, going forward, just tell me that. If you
Mm,
can't do
mm.
it, don't tell me you're going to have it done in 30 seconds and a half hour later. And I don't mind you telling me you can't do it, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
tell me you can't do it.
yeah, yeah. It would be nice if it was as honest as that, wouldn't it?
But
Like
it
a
was one of
first.
the most interesting exchanges I had,
Yeah.
about asking it this sort of either meta question or introspective question. If it's introspecting, I mean, who knows, right? Even the
Mm,
creators don't know, but that can get very interesting.
yeah, yeah. So we were talking about prompt engineering there a little bit. When I was in Dubai last year, I just opened up the newspaper in the hotel, and there's this article, uh, such and such Dubai, because it's run by this, the families, the oil families, and they were getting together about putting together an initiative to have 1 million prompt engineers done, through their system in the next 12 months. 1 million prompt engineers. Sorry, just got a missed phone call. Let me just
No, no worries.
forgot to do that.
Such is life
Disturb.
and 26 or
Yes.
23 or 22.
Yeah, so that whole you just brought out. I hadn't heard of that before. The three steps, but I think what you're saying is you prompt and then you get it to critique it itself. And I mean, from people outside of a natural English language country, that's a big part of it. Is getting the language, English language part of it, because predominantly these are based on the English language. So a lot of what they were teaching is good English, but then also on top of that, I guess the other half is actually how you do it, how you prompt it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm in awe of people that know multiple languages fluently. I've studied a few in school and I've probably forgotten more than some people, you know, know on a bad
Mm,
day. But when people are doing it through the lens of a language that isn't their native language, I'm just in awe. That is a skill. And, they may not think much of it if they've been doing it for years, but I just have so much respect and patience for anyone not doing it in their native language. That is remarkable. And, as English speakers, we kind of win the language lottery, right or wrong. It
mm,
just,
mm.
and it can make us a little lazier about learning other languages. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so do you think the legal system's being upturned by AI? Do you think it's affecting it negatively?
Well, I don't know. What I suspect is happening is because AI is so new, and at least for practical purposes, not
Mm,
sci-fi novels, of course,
mm,
that most judges are of a certain age, and not to be ageist, but the profession itself, and then on top of it, that demographic on average, I stress on average because there's always exceptions, has not so much embraced it, and may or may not be ignoring it, and the law always lags too. So
mm,
I think we're very much at the beginning, although we're about, roughly 2 years in, maybe,
hmm.
very much at the beginning. And it will be interesting. I think what may be interesting, even though it's one orbit out, are the recent cases against social media that the biggies seem to be losing as of a week or two ago.
Hmm.
Meta in particular.
Yeah.
Even though that is not identical, it's closely related, and it'll be just so interesting to see, how that plays out,
Mm,
especially with AI content moderation and things that are offensive about children and things, to see how much AI can or can't do with that. And I don't know, there's just so much that
yeah.
we're on the cusp of.
Yeah. Well, I brought it up because I was talking to a guy that does web development, web designing stuff, and I said, it's making everybody's going out and doing their own websites now. And he said, no, no, not at all. He said, in fact, what's happened is my team have just become far more capable. Instead of having, businesses, our clients at this level, we're now able to take on clients at this level. So we're able to compete in a bigger game, So I don't know, he's got 10 people and he's able to compete as if he's a 50 team because they're so much more productive with these tools. Um, is that what we're going to see with legal professions? Do you think it's going to be more cost effective, I suppose, to get legal consult?
Maybe, it's funny you say that. There's something also counterintuitive I see where someone, and AI certainly helps this, as well as more forms being available online,
Mm-hmm.
where someone will bring me a form thinking it saves them money. But the truth is, sometimes I work on a flat fee when it comes to certain things.
Mm,
And, it's my time, my expertise, my experience that's the primary thing more than the drafting itself, although that's in there. But the irony is, if they bring me a template that's not my trusted template, it may take me as much work or more to get acquainted with their template. And usually there's more to fix than my trusted template. That's
mm, mm,
reasonable. So the irony is, thinking they're helping. I mean, they may have educated themselves by reading it and studying up on it, and that can be good. You can have better uh, time with your advisor, especially if it's hourly, right? So there's efficiencies there. But the irony is bringing me a template or a form that isn't particularly good and isn't mine, doesn't necessarily save you money or save me work. So I think there's an irony there, but I think it's going to push. It's pushing everybody up the value chain, and I'm okay with that. Some people may not. It depends on how experienced you are. If you're less experienced, you might have more to worry about.
Right.
If you're more experienced, you may have generally less to worry about. But it's all about perception, and I see it breaking down roughly by age demographic. I see, and this is intuitive. Again, always exceptions, but on average, I see younger people, much more comfortable, young startup founders using AI more and questioning professional advice or fees, classic fees. So there's pressure on that, of course, to be
Mm,
more value based. I mean, I already try to get away from hourly when I can. Sometimes some things like something really open ended, a dispute or something.
mm,
But then I tend to see people more my age and older on average tend to be more like, well, you sound like you know what you're talking about. Your fees, reasonable given the market. Okay.
mm, mm,
So those are
mm.
things I see. So yeah, I think it'll push us all up on the value curve out of necessity. I think it'll put pressure on fees, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that might be a good thing, right? I mean, if you can
yeah,
be more efficient as a business providing a service and you can pass that on, then everybody wins, right?
yeah,
So we're going to hit one more topic before
sure.
we start to wrap up, and that's your interest in music.
Okay.
So, have you seen anything come out in the AI world which interests you that you're dabbling in the music field?
Absolutely. I sometimes work with a writing partner and bandmate, and he even more so than I have has started using Suno among other tools.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so interesting about that is I think, and I see on forums for songwriters, et cetera, this whole, oh, you used AI, you're crap or you're fake, or and then other people are like, well, and then there's some kids just doing amazing things. For instance, it further helps people who say, well, I can't write songs because I don't happen to play an instrument. Well, your
Mm-hmm.
voice is an instrument. You don't need theory. So that's a whole other thing. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
can be nice, but so it's really helping people to express themselves. I definitely like that. But of course, there's a lot of AI slop, as they call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I see it doing, and my dad's a visual artist, so is my partner. She is. So they have their own experiences with it. But I love the idea that it can help for me break writer's block. I mean, look,
Mm.
usually what I do is I come up with lots of music and then I have to be really thoughtful and it's harder work to come up with lyrics that I really like, right? And some people feel it's the opposite. But I have never had AI come up with something I'm like, oh, I'll just lift. That's awesome. No, but it can create writer's block. Maybe it comes up with something that's awful, but I laugh at it and it sparks
Mm.
another idea because the mind
Mm-hmm.
can bounce around. So I see it as someone, it's like having a partner to bounce things off of and get you unstuck and just point you in other directions. And I really don't see it as all or nothing, you know.
Right.
Um, like I've said, okay, I'm at the end of this bridge. How do I get back to the chorus? And it'll know more music theory than I. And usually, the
Mm.
straight music theory answer is usually it works, but it can be not particularly inspired. It can sound
Mm.
typical.
Mm.
Um, but anyways, I feel like that's one thing it can help with. But oh, I know what I was going to say: rapid prototyping. So, for
Mm.
instance, I find even GarageBand to some extent, certainly the fancier digital audio workstations to be kind of complicated, and because it's not my day job, I barely have time to write songs and play music. I have an academic interest in, but I'm not worried about if I learn the software, even though that would be nice to be independent, and a lot of young people coming up are doing that.
Mm.
But my point is, so something like Suno can help you with sort of rapid prototyping if you keep prompting it to get it what you want. So what I'm in the process of doing is more or less writing the old fashioned way
Mm.
and then dropping into Suno so that I don't have to either pull my hair out with the software to record it the old fashioned way, at least for
Mm.
prototyping, demos, or go to a studio that's, 150 plus an hour across town. And so, will it ever get exactly the way I want? Suno's maybe more likely than others because you can do a little editing along with the AI, but I think it can be a way that even if you're starting out like I do and writing the old fashioned way with a pen and a notebook or a pencil, it can help you ideate
Mm,
fast.
mm,
You
mm,
know, you can put in a prompt, you can say, oh, that sounds overproduced. I want less compression. I want this, I want that, or take out the strings, you know, because I like really simple stripped down production.
mm,
And so it can just do that like that. You know,
mm,
just you let it render and you come back and there it is. Doesn't mean it's perfect. But
mm.
then even if you take that to a studio and say, here's what I'm going for, but this or that different, it's a time saver.
Wow. So Suno is it helps you with lyrics. It helps you with
Well, honestly, ChatGPT or Gemini can help you with lyrics, and it's amazing what it can do. Suno is just one, just the one I'm a little more familiar with.
mm,
It's an AI. It can do two things. It can create songs out of prompts,
right.
but Suno is a little different than some, although I don't think it's totally unique. And it also has like the classic audio interface, you know, as if you were just editing on normal software. And it sort of allows you to go back and forth.
Mm.
And that's what's kind of different than most. I wouldn't say
So
unique.
are you playing an instrument or singing into it, and then it's kind of turning into a song? I haven't quite got it yet. What
Well,
is
it
Suno?
depends. What
Mm,
anybody can do is literally just write a prompt. I want a punk song. Here are some lyrical ideas or a theme. I want it to be this long and not be able to play a thing, and it will spit something out.
right.
Now, the less you give it, the wilder what comes out. But what I do is I sit there with a pencil and a notebook and I write a song with a guitar on my lap.
Hmm.
And then what I can do is, and again, I'm just at the beginning of this, unlike my writing partner, I haven't done it fully yet. But what he's done is taken some of our ideas or my writing and drop it into Suno and come back with three versions and said, what do you
Mm,
like? It's a little bit like, well, it isn't like just doing prompts for a website because that would be more like the first example. But the point is, you can literally start the old fashioned way, but then use it for ideation or demo production in a way that is much faster than doing it the old fashioned way.
right.
You
Right.
know, if you go into a typical audio workstation, I mean, don't get me wrong, God love the people that know it well, but like I get fatigued into 30 types of plate reverb, and I'm like, it's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
that's even
Yeah.
GarageBand, the Apple version, which is actually pretty stripped down on the phone.
Yeah.
I can do a little
Yeah.
easier, but I want the software to get out of the way, and something like Suno, there are others.
Mm, mm.
It seems to be helping to do that.
That's a very good point, isn't it? I mean, you said getting out of the way. I like that way you said that because a lot of the things that we're seeing now with AI are taking the learning curve, the complication, the difficulty, the barriers of entry, they get
The
taken away
tedium.
so you can get to making some progress. I tried writing music because I was in a band as well when I was at school. Just couldn't get over, I wasn't a lyricist. I could fiddle around with my guitars and do a few things. Had some ideas, but the idea of writing a song was just a gap away, just too big a gap away. Never could close that. And I think maybe if the tools like that had existed today, had existed back then, maybe I would have made some progress.
Yeah, and there's some real purists that really poo-poo people that are trying. I love the idea that, you know, a kid in their dorm or anybody of any age, any demographic can literally say, I have this melody in my head. You don't even have to really sing well, and it will let
Hmm.
you create things. And I think some people that are gatekeepers, and they have that in law and tech and other professions, the gatekeepers don't like it, of course, and the cork sniffers, as we say. But I am really neither. I'm much more, especially in music, more than law. I'm especially just DIY garage basement band, and so I'm no gatekeeper. So you know, I obviously love that accessibility.
Wonderful. Well, one last question for you,
Mhm.
Skylar. Is AI hype or help?
It is hype
Hmm.
and it is help.
Okay,
It is
it's both.
absolutely it is absolutely both.
Yeah.
It really is two sides of the same coin. It,
Hmm.
you know, it is like I said, there's what I call intelligence washing or AI washing, where everything is AI baked in, and
Mm.
you know, and like, okay, just like I don't even know if prompt engineering will be a career title in a couple years. It's not that we won't all be prompt engineering. It's just like, who says I'm an e-commerce expert anymore? 20 years
Right.
ago,
Yeah.
that was a niche, that was a title.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
anyways, it's getting baked in. So I think there's a ton of hype. Um, but it helps me every day. It helps a lot of people. I'm trying to get my dad on board with it as a visual artist, and
Mm,
he hasn't bitten yet.
mm,
But the idea of remixing, like I love the idea of putting in your work, and it could be true for writers, not just traditionally creative, but then it outputs something that you react to,
mm,
and
mm,
you react back and forth. And when you come out of it, this mix of machine and human is terribly interesting. And then
mhm.
it gets into issues. Should we have a disclaimer? Like France and Israel, I believe, have laws that if you Photoshop a model's image in an ad, you have to have a disclaimer or whatever. There's issues like that we haven't resolved yet. Do we, like, I'm tempted to do that, like disclose in the liner notes of an EP, what was AI used and how?
Mm,
And
mm,
happy to be clear about that. But I'm intrigued by the interaction, the back and forth.
mm.
Um, to put something that I created and then say, AI, go wild with it. What do you come up with? And I may absolutely hate the output or I may love it. So that's
Yeah.
why I say it's help, it's hype in the wrong hands. It can give you
Mhm.
overconfidence. If you have a rough idea what you're doing, it can really be a help. So it's
Yeah.
absolutely hype and it is absolutely help.
And I love that answer. That's great. You've really unpacked that for me. Thank you very much, Skylar. It's been a real pleasure. We could go on and on. It's been a really good and long podcast. Thank you for being on the show. Maybe we can have you back soon when we've got some more things to talk about, and we certainly will have.
That
Okay.
sounds great, Pete. I'm very like you, passionate about these topics. So thank you for having me.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you. Bye bye.
Mhm.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that chat with Skylar. He had an interesting few takes on how he uses AI, and he recommends certainly using AI to understand contracts, having it put into simple terms that you can understand and read, and that I find that very helpful too. But he also warned about going too far with them, getting it to generate contracts because specific words mean specific things in the legal framework, and they may mean something different to you. So be careful with that. He's also someone who I met for the first time who uses Sumo, which is a songwriting tool. And he talked a little bit about that and how helpful it was for him unblocking the idea of creating songs. So it made writing songs accessible, whereas in the past, perhaps it didn't. So that was some great tips from Skylar. Look, if you want to know more about Skillion, please follow the links in the description. If you want to know more about Skylar, we'll leave those links in the description too. If you could subscribe to our channel, that would be great. Press that like button. I hope that helps, and thanks for watching.